From domestic violence and the world of pro sports to closure for missing persons files and training for those who deal with people in crisis. It is time to draw on the expertise of our Wednesday crime panel. Joining us this evening, Irfan Chaudhry, a criminology professor at the MacEwan University. Irfan, great to meet you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Ed O'Neill is an Edmonton-based defense lawyer. Ed, haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back as well. And a fellow who I do see every week, Jason Van Rassel, Justice and Social Issues reporter with the Calgary Herald. Gentlemen, great to have you on board. Let's start off with a topic generating a lot of discussion across North America. The Baltimore Ravens of the NFL terminated the contract of running back Ray Rice this week in the wake of video evidence of violent domestic abuse that has surfaced. But with allegations of a cover-up by the NFL, did the league fail to take appropriate action against Rice? Jason, I'll start with you. Interestingly, the commissioner of the CFL making headlines this week for prohibiting Rice from playing up here while under suspension. Is the world of pro sports sufficiently different on this side of the border compared to the U.S.?
I think pro sports in general have existed in a moral vacuum for a long time, and they're slowly catching up. I mean, if you think back to the 1990s when O.J. Simpson was charged with murdering his wife and Ron Goldman, and goes on that flight from justice in the white Bronco, and people were lining the highway freeways and cheering him on. I also think sort of same era, the Nike TV commercials with former NBA star Charles Barkley, where he proudly declares he's not a role model. I think sports existed in a kind of moral vacuum for a lot of years, and I think the public allowed it to. What's changed, I think, is the public no longer excuses athletes or celebrities to a lesser extent who exist outside the law. So I think the CFL taking a stance against anyone signing Ray Rice is a good thing. The CFL is also involved in some efforts against domestic violence. Here in Alberta, the Calgary Stampeders and the Edmonton Eskimos are just launching a program where players on the team will mentor young men and boys about appropriate behavior and about domestic violence. I don't know if we can necessarily claim the moral high ground, though, against the American sports leagues. I think athletics in general has been slow to catch up and apply the same standards to their athletes as the community expects them to.
Irfan, would we even be talking about this issue had that violent video not surfaced?
And I think that's a really good point to be making, right? I like Jason's comment about that whole idea about that moral vacuum because he's right. I mean, the amount of times that athletes seem to get away with, a slap on the wrist in comparison to what others who aren't in that limelight would get away with, it's really alarming. And it's interesting to see that once that video was surfaced, the NFL finally came into action and almost begrudgingly took more of a harsher stance, because beforehand it was just 2-game suspension versus another player that was found with a small amount of marijuana on him, and he was given a 10-game suspension. So that moral vacuum is a really interesting analogy to I think view this from, for sure.
Ed, do you think the world of pro sports is finally catching up with the rest of us in society, or are they being poked and prodded along?
I think it's finally catching up, and boy, the manner in which domestic violence cases have been dealt with in the courts has changed dramatically since I started practicing about 25 years ago now, generally for the better. I think pro sports is catching up, largely because of this. The media had a great, very significant role in via social media as well, via Twitter, in bringing this issue to light. And Commissioner Goodell really just has now drawn the line in the sand. Ray Rice is a $35 million contract, 5 years, $7 million per year. That's gone now, and when you got to consider the message has now been sent, because even if this indefinite suspension is ever lifted, this guy's radioactive. It's really unlikely that any NFL team is going to be able to absorb the public relations fallout from signing him again. So I think that sends a pretty strong message, and the rest of the sporting world has their eyes on this case.
That video evidence is very compelling. It says a lot, but what about the cases where there may not be video evidence? Do you get into a gray zone there?
Well, you do, and here's a concern. I think everyone's for this. My only concern is we don't start suspending people, punishing players until there's evidence of wrongdoing. I'd hate to see someone suspended and lose their status and a lot of money on the basis of false allegations. So if there's corroborative evidence, like there is in this case, or a conviction, I've got no problem with it. But I'd hate to see any punishment meted out until there's clear corroborative evidence or a conviction.
Jason, will the day ever come where pro athletes are actually held to the same high standard as the rest of society?
We'll see. I don't think we're there yet. And I think Ed was a little optimistic, perhaps, when he said, you know what, if a guy like Ray Rice is ever reinstated, he'd be radioactive. You know, I can remember people saying the same thing when Michael Vick, who was convicted of that dogfighting ring back in the southern U.S., came out of prison, and people figured his career was over. But you know what? His performance on the field, eventually won the day, and he did end up getting back into football. There are all kinds of athletes that at the time do something horrible, something reprehensible. They're declared radioactive. They may or may not do jail time, and everyone figures they're done. But then, when they get out of jail, there's usually someone out there who's willing to take a chance on them. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. People can be redeemed. But to think Ray Rice, his football career is over, I think would be overly optimistic and premature.
All right, time for a break. Up next, new Alberta effort